to run the new Alberta.
They would beg to negotiate a new deal.
The system could not be fixed.
Responsibility isn't something you outsource.
Alberta could be the new America.
Our final speaker of the evening, he's an Alberta lawyer with 30 years of experience, and he's crossed out my note here because I said primarily known for, and he just crossed out and said suing governments. Fair? What are the benefits of Alberta being within a united Canada or an independent nation? To discuss, please welcome Jeff Rath.
Wow, what a nice turnout tonight. So anyway, it's a real pleasure to be here this evening. I have to warn everybody tonight, I think my filter broke at some point today. I was in court earlier this afternoon on a class action that we're working on with regard to all the businesses that have been harmed and destroyed in Alberta by all of the horrible Jason Kenney COVID orders. And of course, I walked into court today, and our learned judge, who I quite like, Justice Feasby, came in and he said, I hope everybody doesn't mind. I've been really sick for the last week and I can barely talk. He said, I have COVID. I couldn't help it. No, it just slipped out of my mouth. The next words out of my mouth were, oh, so how are those vaccines working so far? It was, I have to say, I'm not proud of that, was not my finest moment as an advocate. Because, as we all know, the first commandment of advocacy is written in stone, thou shalt not piss off thy judge. Not my finest moment. But anyway, I came here tonight to speak to a project that's certainly near and dear to my heart and the hearts of all the people and the hundreds of thousands of volunteers and supporters now of the Alberta Prosperity Project. Specifically, getting Alberta the hell out of Canada. And every day that we work on this project, we find a new reason to really internalize and understand that the Ontario or the Ottawa Liberals and Trudeau, then followed by Mark Carney, are an existential threat to Albertans and the province of Alberta. Just today, I was talking to a former Bank of Canada economist who reached out and volunteered to work for us, right, or work with us. And what we're working on right now, and I want to announce it after listening to Chris speak, we are in the process of finalizing a fully costed draft fiscal plan for an independent Alberta. And all of the things that Chris was saying that we need to take into account, including, costing out an Alberta armed forces at 3% of GDP, external affairs, immigration, we call it the immigration and deportation plan, border security, policing, pensions, because me personally, and I think a lot of us in Alberta understand the disgusting levels of poverty that Canada has left our Indigenous people in for the last 150 years of that dysfunctional relationship. If it's possible, I think Ottawa hates Indigenous people more than they hate Albertans. If you've been to any communities in northern Alberta and have experienced the abject poverty that Ottawa has kept those people in. So as a thought exercise, we tripled the amount of money being spent by Ottawa and Indigenous people in Alberta to $4.5 to $5 billion. Costed everything in, okay? And would anybody care to guess what the fiscal capacity surplus of Alberta will be after we stop sending $70 billion a year to Ottawa in taxes, CPP, and UI? The numbers range depending on assumptions made on spending, and we're trying to be as conservative as possible. The numbers range from $21 to $48 billion would be our fiscal capacity surplus the minute Alberta declared itself independent from Canada. Let that sink in. And, if people think about why it is we need to leave or should we leave or whatever it is, think about every single day there is a new assault on this province, on our culture, on our people, on our way of life. No sooner was Mark Carney re-elected or elected to the prime ministership. I shouldn't say re-elected, but he really was the hand up Trudeau's butt, making his mouth move like a puppet for the last 10 years. But anyway, no sooner did Carney come back into power than the Senate reintroduced the Universal Basic Income Bill, right? For those of you that don't know what this means, and its companion bill is an amendment to the Canada Elections Act, which would lower the voting age in Canada from 18 to 16, right? And the reason that they want to lower the voting age to 16, again, it's just more continued, let's keep re-electing Liberal governments, is because the Universal Basic Income Bill posits a world where every single person in Canada is given $2,000 a month. So think about that. So we have 17-year-old kids. They can drop out of school, right? They don't have to have a plan to go back to school. They don't have to have a plan to go to university, get a trade, get a job, have a plan to get a job. The minute they turn 16, they can vote for a Liberal government to give them $2,000 a month when they turn 17, so they can stay at home, smoke legalized marijuana, play video games, and basically become useless parasites within our society. Is this the plan that any of us had for our children or our grandchildren? Absolutely not. And if you think about Alberta and Alberta culture, we have a distinct culture, certainly distinct from Quebec's, which is really a culture of parasitism, where they literally live like leeches off of Alberta, and the only reason that they stay in Canada is because they can suck $15 billion a year out of all of your pockets so that they can run surplus budgets at our expense, while our governments have to borrow $6 billion a year to pay our nurses, our teachers, our doctors, our hospitals, our roads, et cetera, et cetera. The system is completely dysfunctional. The culture of Alberta, and of every Albertan in this room, I would wager, is that we are a hardworking, fiercely independent people. We want to wake up in the morning, we want to go to work, we want to support our families, we want to take care of our kids, we want to take care of our grandkids, we want to take care of our parents, and most of all, we want governments to stay the hell out of our lives. This is not the culture of Quebec. This is not the culture of Ontario. They want to involve themselves in every single aspect of our lives, including how much oil and gas we can produce, how much CO2 we're permitted to emit into the atmosphere to help our forests grow, to help our crops grow, to help our plants grow in the province. No, they want to limit all of that, which is really their way of preventing us from prospering. Typically, when I'm giving this talk, I'm following Dennis Modry, who has a slide, that basically shows that, Ottawa has intentionally, since the 1980s, kept Alberta down in its place economically. I think some of the earlier speakers, have shown that. It's been deliberate. Mark Lalonde, one of, Trudeau's right-hand hatchet men in 1980, prior to the inception of the NEP, basically stated we need to do something to prevent Alberta from becoming too powerful, because we do not want Alberta to be the center of finance and economics in Canada. For Eastern politicians, there is nothing worse than thinking about all of the corporate headquarters in Toronto and Quebec moving to Alberta and having them left with nobody to take bribes from other than the Hells Angels. Right? That's a nightmare for them, right? So our project moving forward, quite frankly, is, to show Albertans that we are going to be significantly better off outside of Canada than we are in it. And rather than, we can focus on grievances all night long. There's no shortage of them. I mean, just quickly, Senate seats as an example, right? Newfoundland has basically, double the population of Red Deer? They have 6 Senate seats. Prince Edward Island has 4 Senate seats. Nova Scotia and New Brunswick each have 10. So collectively, the Maritimes, right, with half the population of Alberta. Collectively, they have 2.5 million people. They have 30 Senate seats to our 6, right? Supreme Court seats. Ontario has 3. Quebec has 3. The Maritimes have 1, and all of the West, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia have 2 seats. So is it any wonder that any time we go up to the Supreme Court on a division of powers issue, surprise, surprise, the Supreme Court of Canada rules against Alberta? You know, the vested power structure of this country and the structure of Canadian federalism is designed to keep Alberta in its place as a colony, basically generating wealth for Eastern Canada at the expense of every Albertan and every person in this room. That's the way the country was designed. It was designed intentionally, and we have been basically on the receiving end of it as a colonized and oppressed people since the inception of Alberta as a province in 1905. That's all there is to it. The good news for us is that there's a way forward. And the way forward, quite frankly, is for all of us to organize, all of us to talk to our friends and neighbors. I'm going to be so happy when that draft fiscal plan is out, because I think it's going to be a game changer for the Alberta independence movement. You know, I won't share the person's name, but a very prominent member of the UCP reviewed the document for me, and the comment was, wow, if we don't implement this, we're going to be guilty of a breach of fiduciary obligation towards the people that elected us. You know, and I want people to think about that. And I want, you know, obviously I have a lot of respect for our premier. She has a very difficult job walking the tightrope that she's walking. But, you know, I would like all of us to remind her and have her internalize the fact that the standard of a fiduciary is a reasonably prudent person of business managing their own affairs. So if somebody were told that there was a way out of the complete mess that Alberta is in on a constant basis, with our industries being penalized, with our citizens, you know, randomly being, you know, rendered unemployed at the whim of some politician in Ottawa, that our private property, whether it be our firearms or anything else, can be subject to confiscation at the flick of a pen by some moron living in a cottage, right? Would we think that's acceptable? And if somebody were to show, you know, a fiduciary, here's a plan, you know, to get forward and to approve the lot of the people that you're responsible to, that will show, you know, literally, you know, a $40 billion fiscal surplus that could be immediately applied to tax savings to reduce everybody's tax bill in this province by, 30 to 50% in year 1, right? It would be irresponsible not to implement that plan and to proceed with that plan. And I'm stating clearly that it's a breach of fiduciary duty on the part of our elected officials not to pursue that plan. And I think some of you may know a number of, it's probably over a month ago now, it's been a bit of a whirlwind. I've become a road warrior along with Mitch Sylvester, traveling to various points in the province. I was up in Bonnyville the other night, and then back home, and then in court, and Cochrane last night, and then here tonight. But, one of the things that's become really evident across the province is that the forces of federalism, you know, including Premier Smith, are completely incapable of telling us why it is that we're going to be better off if we stay in Canada, right? You know, I wrote an open letter, and just off the top of my head, I listed the top 10 reasons we'd be better off if we left Canada, kind of like a Letterman's top 10 list, right? Number 1, no more federal regulation of citizens of Alberta, right? Number 2, no more federal income tax. Number 3, no more carbon tax, industrial or personal. Number 4, no more capital gains tax. Number 5, you know, you could go on and on. Right? You know, and again, what are we being told in exchange? Well, maybe we'll get a pipeline. They might give us a pipeline. That would be good. You know, even if we did get a pipeline, so what? right? We have, we have short-term jobs in construction. We have billionaires getting richer. And, right, there's another $20 billion that goes into the Alberta Treasury. So apparently we can afford to give more money to the parasites in Quebec that live off of every person in this room. And what I say is enough is enough. That we need to get ourselves out of the mentality that somehow or other, and I think Professor Party said it very well, that any attachment we had to what used to be Canada is anything worth protecting or pining for nostalgically, because the Canada that we all grew up in does not exist anymore. We now live in a Canada where if Albertans, people from Saskatchewan, people from right across the country, even from Quebec, show up in Ottawa to protest something that a Liberal government is doing that seems dictatorial and nonsensical, what's the response? They invoke the Emergencies Act and have riot police and horses trample little old Indigenous women in the streets because they can't stand being told that they can't do what they want whenever they want to do it. That's not the country I grew up in, and it's not the country that I want to leave my daughter. All of us that are involved in this movement, we're not doing it for ourselves. None of us, and I can promise you, I've avoided political office my entire life and career as a barrister. I have no intention of ever seeking public office. Neither is Mitch Sylvester or anybody else that we're working with. What we are trying to do is to make a better world and a better country, specifically Alberta as a country, for our children and our grandchildren and all the future generations that come after us. Right now, and again, this Bank of Canada economist today, like every time I talk to somebody, I become more depressed or more shocked about the mess that we're being led into. He said, oh yeah, he says, you ever wonder why everything seems like it costs twice as much as it did, 5 or 10 years ago? And I said, yeah. I said, ever since COVID, it's like every time I turn around, it's like, you can't even plan a family vacation by going, wow, this was not this much money 2 years ago or 3 years ago. He said, oh yeah. He says, you know what the root cause of that is that nobody's talking about? Under Trudeau, forget about the deficits, right? And keep in mind, the guy that's telling me this is a former Bank of Canada guy. He says, under Trudeau, with Carney's advice, because keep in mind, Carney was a central banker. Are you ready for this? Trudeau doubled the M2 money supply in Canada. So basically under Trudeau, he doubled the amount of Canadian dollars in circulation, so that our dollars are literally worth half as much as they were when he came in. The only reason I think a lot of us haven't noticed it is we had the same people applying the same idiotic monetary theories under Joe Biden. So the spread between the Canadian dollar and the US dollar over the last little while didn't get that far out of whack, but it was only because the Americans were engaged, and the American Federal Reserve was engaged in the same level of stupidity, literally doubling the amount of money in circulation without any care or thought for the fact that you do that. It's basic economics 101, right? You're reducing the value of the monetary unit by 50%. Like when that hit me the other day, I was just like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense, right? But that's what we have to look forward to. And keep in mind what we're dealing with. When I say Mark Carney is an existential threat to Alberta, he is the one that engineered that. Do you think there's not going to be more money printing under Carney? How is he going to pay for the 150 billion euros / 225 million Canadian dollars that he's going to put into Europe to defend Europe? Who in this room voted for that? Right? No one. So, that's what we're dealing with going forward. And then they just passed Bill C-5. Which is literally, if anybody actually, remembers their history and remembers, where the word fascist came from in World War II, that was a term coined by Mussolini, fascisti. It meant all together, working together, government hand in glove with industry. So basically, the whole program that Carney has now, they call it, the WEF calls it stakeholder capitalism, right? It's really crony capitalism, where Mark Carney and all of his buddies are lining up to build a $50 billion carbon sucking machine in Alberta that we don't need, that we're gonna pay for, right? In order to decarbonize our oil. Has anybody heard anything so stupid? And hear from me that when Carney talks about an energy corridor, he's not talking about oil and gas pipelines. He's talking about electrifying the country from coast to coast to coast, with Brookfield supplying modular nuclear reactors as booster stations so that we don't have line loss. And that's how he's going to power all of the electric vehicles in Alberta when he takes our cars and trucks away. So Carney's future for Alberta is that all of us are going to be trying to suffer through a winter at -40 with vehicles that won't go 100 kilometers. And every time we need to stop to charge, we plug them in and all of our money goes straight to Brookfield. You know, that's the future that Carney has planned for us. And we say that there's a real easy way out of that, and a really simple way forward to get us out of the fascist hell that Mark Carney has planned for us, and that World Economic Forum has planned for us. And that is simply for all of us to unite around one simple idea, that Alberta is going to be much better off outside of Canada as an independent country on a going forward basis with our own economy, our own currency, and complete control of our own destiny here in Alberta. So thank you very much for listening to me tonight. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure and a real honor to be able to speak to my fellow Albertans. Thank you so much for your time and attention this evening. Thank you.
We sent our best people to Ottawa to fix the system, but the system could not be fixed.
They will beg to come sit at our table to negotiate a new deal.
And that is the way we're going to run the new Alberta.
Yet successive governments, blue or orange, have not done them.
About $1 billion a week on interest payments on the national debt.
It was inserted to bring about a technocratic overhaul of our government. We're actually all on the same page for now in trying to pursue the same policies that will improve fairness for Alberta.
Responsibility isn't something you outsource.
And complete control of our own destiny here in Alberta.
They don't want to make change now, but they know that they can.
Alberta could be the new America.